Babylon, one of the most famous cities of the Bible. Babylon, an empire that dominated the ancient world as a center of trade, military power, culture, and religion. Babylon, the symbol of wealth and opulence, mystery and intrigue, decadence and corruption. Babylon, the imperial city of Hammurabi and of Nebuchadnezzar, its greatest king.
Hi everybody, my name's James. Welcome to California High Desert Preacher. Today's video is going to be discussing
Single night by the decree of God himself. That was over 2,500 years ago. Today, Babylon is rising again on the Mesopotamian plain. Its partial rebuilding has captured the attention of theologians, scholars, and teachers of Bible prophecy alike. To some, it signals the rise of the dreaded Babylon the Great, foretold in the book of Revelation. What relevance does it hold for us today? And why does the legacy of Babylon continue to fascinate us? Join us as we explore Babylon, past, present, and future.
Hello, I'm Neil Earl. For years, as a minister and as a historian, I have been fascinated with the ancient Near East, especially as it relates to the Bible. You know, when we think of the places where the events of the Bible occurred, we usually think of Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, Nazareth, where he grew up, or perhaps Jerusalem, where he was crucified. But many famous events of the Bible took place in a land hundreds of miles from where Jesus lived, in a part of the world called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Today, much of ancient Mesopotamia lies within the borders of the modern country of Iraq. Mesopotamia is renowned as the cradle of civilization. Some of its cities date back to the very beginning of recorded history. Possibly the most famous of all is Babylon. Located on the banks of the Euphrates about 60 miles south of present-day Baghdad, Babylon has had a long and fascinating history. Today, most of ancient Babylon is nothing but crumbling ruins and broken remnants beneath the sands of time. So why this fascination with a long-gone empire and a decayed city? Well, there's a story here, an intriguing story, and it's told through the hundreds of historical and religious texts that have been uncovered by archaeology. This information, put together with the Bible, makes the story of ancient Babylon an important one for us today. Because in the Bible, Babylon is more than merely a place on the map. Babylon symbolizes an idea, a philosophy, a way of thinking opposed to God. That ideology, based on human reason, human pride and arrogance, often expressed as self-indulgent materialism, is still with us today. That attitude caused God to intervene in the affairs of ancient Babylon. As we'll see, the Bible writers chronicled and preserved the story of ancient Babylon to give us insight into our world today and far into the future. But before we consider what lies ahead, let's examine what history can reveal to us. For history holds the key to our future. Our story begins long before there was a city named Babylon. It begins with a group of travelers who made their way into the sun-baked plain of southern Mesopotamia over 2,000 years before the birth of Jesus. The Bible tells us these wanderers were descendants of the patriarch Noah and his family. In the decades following the Great Flood, they migrated southward along the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates. The book of Genesis tells us that Noah's sons settled in the plain of Shinar. Shinar is the biblical name for the region later called Babylonia. Today it's known as southeastern Iraq. God had wanted Noah's sons to move out and fill the earth. Instead, they defiantly resolved to unite under their own authority.
They said to each other, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth."
According to the first century historian Flavius Josephus, the leader of these people was Nimrod, Noah's great-grandson. The Bible tells us Nimrod was a mighty warrior on the earth. Under his leadership, the people began to build a great tower. Nimrod wanted to excite people's awe and wonder. He wanted to build an empire. He wanted to hold people together under his authority.
The Tower of Babel, I think, illustrates that purpose perfectly, because that's exactly what they attempt to do there. They attempt to be creators. Because when you stop and think of it, Genesis presents creation in terms of being in the form and nature of God. And so we become little creators. And especially in roles of power, they felt that they become creators. And so if you create something and feel that it is so superior, then in a sense you can almost see yourself as being a person of destiny, you know, even somewhat divine, as the ancient rulers often thought of themselves.
To build a tower that would reach to the heavens. Doesn't this sound familiar? It's humanity's age-old attempt to try to reach the spiritual through the physical. Artists have offered their impression of what this tower, the famous Tower of Babel, may have looked like. Some of them quite fanciful. More than likely, it was a simple terraced mound of brick and earth, not unlike the later temple towers known as ziggurats. Ziggurats are square at the base, with sloping step sides leading upward to a shrine at the top. The plain of Shinar is flat. A building just 100 or so feet high can be seen for miles around. The medieval Tower of Samarra, for example, located north of Baghdad, is a spiral minaret about 150 feet high. Its prominence throughout the region serves as a convenient directional marker. In fact, some medieval travelers thought it was the Tower of Babel. The Bible tells us that God allowed the builders to work on the tower for a while. Then he intervened.
The Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world.
In a sudden act, God confused the language of the people. A babel of voices arose on the scaffoldings. Suddenly the foremen and architects could no longer communicate with the workers. Panic reigned. The building of the city and its great tower came to an abrupt halt. In the Akkadian language, the site of the uncompleted city was known as the Gate of God. But the Hebrews named it Babel, based on the Hebrew word meaning to confuse. Babylon is merely the Greek mode of spelling the Hebrew Babel. Either way, Babylon and Babel are one and the same. And Babylonia referred to the region centered around the city. The story of the Tower of Babel was designed to teach an important lesson. God's tolerance of human pride and rebellion has its limits. And very early we see Babylon becoming a symbol of opposition to God. In fact, human pride is a consistent theme whenever the Bible mentions Babylon. The grandiose dreams of the builders of the Tower of Babel makes an important historical benchmark. It gives us our first glimpse into a civilization organized against God. The Tower of Babel was God's first intervention in the history of Babylon. It wouldn't be the last. Over 2 centuries passed. Then we find Babylon re-emerging on the world scene, this time under the Amorites. They founded a dynasty there around 2000 BC. Historians call this the Old Babylonian Empire. The most famous king of this empire was a ruler named Hammurabi. Hammurabi is perhaps best known for his set of laws that have been preserved to this day. The famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the first structured systems of law in history. The laws are inscribed on a polished black diorite stela or pillar over 7 feet high. It's topped by a bas-relief showing Hammurabi standing before the sun god Shamash, god of justice. The stela carries more than 4,000 lines of cuneiform script in the Akkadian language, containing nearly 300 legal provisions. They cover business, crime, family disputes, agricultural interest, and other matters. Though the code invoked some harsh punishments, it did bring law and order to a land where crime and disorder had long held sway. Punishment was swift and certain. Under Hammurabi, Babylon achieved military supremacy in Mesopotamia. He built an empire of unequal power. It stretched from the Persian Gulf to the upper reaches of the Tigris River. Babylon became a leading literary and cultural center, the intellectual capital of Mesopotamia. Babylonian civilization was highly advanced. Mathematical and astronomical texts reveal, for example, that the ancient Babylonians developed the 60-minute hour and the 360-degree circle. Hammurabi extended Babylonian rule not only by conquest, but also by trade. Babylon stood at the crossroads of world commerce and communication. Caravans brought rare and exotic products from far and wide. Cloves, indigenous to the Moluccas or Spice Islands of faraway Indonesia, were among the many luxuries imported. The enticements of trade and commerce, blended with religion, as we'll see, have always been key to the success and dominance of the Babylonian system. Babylon, with its original name meaning Gate of God, was a prominent religious center, and it boasted some of the most striking temples of the ancient world. Like most ancient peoples, Babylonians worshipped many gods. Their religion centered around idolatry. They feared the forces of nature. In the barren deserts of Mesopotamia, the margin between survival and prosperity was a very thin one indeed. Too little or too much rain could wipe out a whole year's food supply. The Babylonians worshipped scores of different deities, looking to them for mercy and protection, conducting intricate and sometimes chilling rituals. The gods needed appeasing. In ancient times, whoever controlled the religion controlled the people. It was no wonder then that the Babylonians believed their king reigned as the earthly representative of the gods. They were among the first to fuse religion and politics into a totalitarian mindset. That mindset is carried on throughout history. Idolatry permeated every facet of ancient Near Eastern life. And the problem with this was that the ordinary person was almost completely cut off from the knowledge of the true God, the God of the Bible. This, we will see, is also the Babylonian pattern. Hammurabi's laws enabled the king to maintain strict control. After all, Babylon was built on slave labor, and that state required complete subordination of the individual to its power and its gods.
The ancient monarchs were totalitarian. While they ruled, they had almost absolute authority because they were the legislature, the judicial, and the executive branch all tied up in one. Practically, historically, every king has, in a sense, set themselves up as little gods. There are very few rulers who recognize God in terms of a power greater than they are. Oh, they may use the language, but they see themselves as above the law, as the key interpreters of the law. So I always say there are just very few rulers that you could say did not see themselves as little gods.
Hammurabi forged one of the greatest empires of the ancient Near East. He laid the basis of a civilization that would endure for more than 1,000 years after his death. But it was a civilization based on power, prestige, the pursuit of wealth, and with little knowledge of the Creator God. Even Hammurabi's dynasty could not last forever. After a reign of more than 40 years, barbaric tribesmen from the mountains in the east moved in to raid and weaken Babylonia. A long, drawn-out time of trouble began. Around 1,600 years before Christ, Babylon was sacked and burned by another people mentioned in the Bible, the Hittites. The Hittites carried off Babylonian wealth and prisoners to far-off Anatolia, our modern Turkey. Later, the Assyrians, well known to readers of the Old Testament, conquered Babylon. Centuries of political chaos would prevail before Babylon would rise again as an independent city. The first great age of Babylon had ended. Ancient Assyria was one of Babylon's powerful rivals. This massive human-headed winged bull is striking testimony to the power of Assyria. The Assyrian Empire was a huge military machine, widely regarded as one of the most brutal and oppressive kingdoms in history. In 689 BC, Assyria's hammer blows inflicted the worst humiliation yet upon Babylon. In an attempt to throttle a Babylonian resurgence, the Assyrian hordes under King Sennacherib pillaged and burnt Babylon. They threw its rubble into the Euphrates. The Assyrians flooded the city. Its very foundations were destroyed. Sennacherib boasted, "I made its destruction more complete than that by a flood, that in days to come the site of the city and its temples and gods might not be remembered. I completely blotted it out with floods of water and made it like a meadow." Sennacherib left Babylon thinking he had dealt the death blow. He was painfully mistaken. Babylon does not go down easily. She would rise again to claim her revenge. And that's precisely what happened. The site of Babylon was eventually occupied and rebuilt by the Chaldeans. It was the Chaldeans who finally humbled proud Assyria. It was in the year 612 BC when the Chaldeans stormed the walls of Nineveh, Assyria's capital city. Nineveh fell. It was utterly destroyed. Today, the ruins of Nineveh attest to the near-total destruction of that ancient city. So complete was Nineveh's disappearance that it wasn't rediscovered until just 150 years ago. Assyria's power was broken, but under the Chaldeans, Babylon was back with a vengeance. And here is a major clue to biblical history and prophecy. Babylon, this great city, this great symbolic nemesis of God, emerges repeatedly from the abyss of destruction. She reappears again and again on the stage of history, powerfully influencing the course of civilization. The Assyrian collapse left a vacuum which both Egypt and Babylon sought to fill. 1,000 years after the golden age of Hammurabi, Babylon at last had a chance to regain the prominence and prestige that had once been hers. It was the summer of 605 BC. Well-armed Babylonian forces struck a sudden and decisive blow against the Egyptians. Their forces met at Carchemish in northern Syria. The battle cost Egypt its control of the Middle East. Now, almost a millennium after Hammurabi, Babylon once again held undisputed power in the ancient Near East. Yes, Babylon was back. But could a resurgent, rebuilt Babylon avert the fate that had already overtaken Nimrod's city and Hammurabi's empire? Time would tell.
Babylon, past, present, and future.